Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
So today, our guest on the show is my mentor, colleague, and friend, Cinnie Noble with Cinergy Coaching from Toronto, Canada. And we're going to be talking with her about the topic conflict coaching, empowering you to move through conflict constructively. Now, we invite our listeners to call in at, the number is 347-324-3591 with your questions or comments. And when you call in, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to talk to Cinnie and me about, you're just going to press the number 1 key so that you let me know you want to join the conversation. For our Blog Talk Radio registered users, the chat room is open, and you can pose your question or comments there as well. So again, that number is 347-324-3591. So a little bit about Cinnie. Cinnie Noble is a lawyer, mediator, and certified coach through the International Coach Federation. She is a pioneer in the development of a unique model for conflict coaching, having created the Cinergy model in 1999. Now, Cinnie combined conflict management and coaching principles to develop this model, which helps people gain increased competence to be able to engage in conflict, to manage and resolve their interpersonal disputes, and to effectively participate in dispute resolution processes such as mediation. Cinnie coaches worldwide and trains others to use this model in Canada, the U.S., Australia, Ireland, and other parts of the world. She has been the consultant on the conflict management coaching program for the United States Transportation Security Administration, and she's been doing that since 2004. And she also provides consultation on the development of such programs for other organizations. Now, Cinnie hosts a number of special interest groups, including the Conflict Coaching Special Interest Group at the International Coach Federation, and she's also the chair of the Conflict Coaching Committee of the Association for Conflict Resolution. She's right now currently writing a book on conflict coaching and is a well-known author and speaker on conflict coaching, so we're really honored to have Cinnie on the show. Now, initially, and we'll give you this website again, she can actually be found at www.cinergycoaching, that's Cinergy, C-I-N-E-R-G-Y, coaching.com. So welcome, Cinnie. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you, Patty. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, so let's get started so our listeners can find out more about conflict coaching. So why don't we start with how you came to be a conflict coach?
Well, all right. Well, you know, it's interesting when I look back on that. It was in 1999, and I had been a lawyer mediator for mostly doing organizational work by that time, although I had worked with families as well as in my law practice. And when I went into the field of alternate dispute resolution, I started to notice a big gap in that field, which was, besides ombudspeople in workplaces where they have those folks who help people on a one-to-one basis, I wasn't seeing any service within the field that dealt with people on a one-to-one. And that need became so apparent to me because I realized that all of the conflict management training that many organizations have and people go through isn't always strong enough, sufficient enough for people to deal with how they manage and engage in conflict. And many times training and other ways that people learn how to manage conflict comes from trial and error and not enough attention paid to their own specific issues around how they manage and resolve conflict. And probably most relevant to where I got to with this, Patty, was that as the language began to shift in the conflict management field to engaging in conflict, not just managing or resolving, but being able to do so constructively, the theme of what much of the work that you do, it became all the more apparent that if you provide people with some tools on their own about the way they do disputes, with how they manage, how they engage, that it would be far broader and deeper for people to manage conflict.
Well, I'm really glad that you said that because, we've heard for a long time, I'm sure people have heard about mediators and arbitrators, and whatnot, as far as somebody coming in as a neutral or someone helping them, the typical thing. But to actually have someone like yourself, like us, who do the coaching around engaging in conflict, not being afraid of doing that. How do we do that effectively? So in starting that, and this is what you primarily do now, is that right? You're primarily, that's what most of your practice is now.
Well, it is indeed, but it's interesting. I do still do some mediation, but far less. And one of the reasons around that is that as I got into this work, I did a lot of research, Patty, about what was it that people who were in conflict would like and benefit from. And it's how I constructed the model is I worked with people to find out how could they get there, what did they need. And as I discovered that, I discovered the whole world of coaching. And what I realized was that mediation and other processes, as terrific as they are very reactive. And I was hearing more people wanting to be proactive. They wanted to step up to the plate before anything ever escalated, maybe preventatively, but also how will I manage this? That took the shift. And so if I get called now to do mediation, I will usually say, is a coaching appropriate here or is it mediation? And sometimes it's both because there is concepts around and processes around pre-mediation coaching and the use of coaching principles within third-party processes like mediation.
Okay, so being proactive now, based on your years of doing this, obviously you did some very experiential-based research based on the cases that you were doing to create this structured model. Talk about, if you will, for the audience, defining conflict coaching. How do you define it, and then start to talk about how it's different from other coaching formats such as life coaching and executive coaching.
Okay, that's a great question, Patty. Conflict coaching is a specialty within the field of coaching, and there are many specialties, and I'll get to that part of your question momentarily. If I take conflict coaching as its own distinct process, within the coaching field, within the field of alternate dispute resolution, it's a one-on-one process for helping people manage and engage in conflict, to resolve their disputes, and to gain increased conflict competence. So it's a long definition in some ways. I think probably stressing that it's one-on-one, although you can do team coaching in organizations that is conflict coaching using the same model. Most of my work is a one-to-one and follows people come to me because they are either in a dispute and they want to manage it better, they're anticipating something that they want to be better prepared for, there has been something that they are reeling from and thinking they could handle it better, it really didn't get resolved, or it's lingering for them and they're sensing some lack of resilience on their part. Those are the main dispute-specific areas of conflict coaching as I would define it. It also can be for people who want to concentrate on their behavior, so there's not a dispute per se. They might come and say, I'm finding that I'm always getting defensive when people criticize me, and then I get into an argument. And what they want to deal with is how to manage when they get criticized or feel criticized, how to manage that better. So it's more behavioral in nature.
And I think that's where it ties into the conflict competence piece. We've talked about that on the show before about, we've had Craig Rundy, who was one of the early coiners of that term, conflict competence. And does that pretty much line up with what you were referring to in that general becoming conflict competent, dealing with those more overarching behaviors that you were talking about?
Well, it is indeed, and in fact, Craig Rundy, for those who had listened to it, the conflict dynamics profile, in some cases if people are looking at their behaviors, I will use an assessment tool like the conflict dynamics profile. It's one of my preferred tools because it does deal with responses and behaviors and hot buttons, and those are so many of the elements of conflict for people. You asked, Patty, about how this fits into the field of coaching. So maybe I'll go there now, if that's okay with you.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. When I got into the field of coaching, having been in the field of conflict management for a long time, I saw some fairly consistent language amongst the various schools who are accredited by International Coach Federation that define coaching. And that, in sort of short strokes, is that people come, you find out where they're at and when they come there and where they want to be. And that is the goal, and it's a very goal-oriented process. What Coaching the Gap is all about in the language of many coaching schools, many coaches, would be helping people get from where they are to where they want to be and what the action steps are needed to get there and what challenges will get in the way of them reaching their goals. And in most kinds of coaching, whether it's a niche like conflict coaching or other weight loss, adult ADD, or any other many specialties out there, it's the standard essentially to look at those cornerstones. What happens to help people get there in all kinds of coaching is, can they look at this differently? Whatever their issue is and their goal is, can they get some different perspectives and gain some new awarenesses? And so in conflict coaching, at least the model that I have, the piece before people can actually take steps to get to their goal is to help them look more closely at, can they look at what's happened differently? And their use of powerful questions, which is one of the greatest tools of coaches, helps people gain increased consciousness and awareness in order to be able to look differently at where they were to be able to do something differently.
So when they're looking at things differently, I mean, part of that is, allowing some space for the self-awareness about, what's triggering them. And also, my understanding about this model for you and what we do in conflict coaching is that seeing things differently is about shifting them. And shifting them in a way that they view it differently and maybe react or respond differently. Now, we have some comments from the chat room, and, a lot of times, when in this model, you're looking at those triggers, you're looking at emotion, you're looking at assumptions, you're looking at some of the thoughts around the triggers that they have. How is this really different from counseling? Because, I get that question all the time from potential clients as well. Well, how is this conflict coaching different from counseling?
Well, and that is a good question. It does come up a lot, and there's been a lot written about the differences between counseling and therapy and coaching, and it's very important for people to know the distinction because the International Coach Federation and those of us who do coaching do not hold ourselves out to be counselors or therapists, although there are many people in those fields that might want to become coaches and join the Coaching Federation. There are some similarities, which are that it's a one-on-one process, that the practitioner, the coach, or the counselor are caring, they want to help people, and there may be some overlaps in what I'm about to tell you with some forms of counseling, and that is very generally, some forms of counseling and therapy help go back to the sources. They look at the genesis of what happened. And so sometimes in conflict coaching, someone might say, well, I do this because I had a really, really strict mother. And in counseling or therapy, often the therapist would search that out, deal with it, look at the source a bit more to try to get under the root of it. However, in conflict coaching, I don't spend time, we don't spend time on going to the genesis or the roots of those. It's not about healing or mending. That's not the sole purpose of coaching, although many people do feel that they're mending the way they do things, but it's not the purpose like some forms of counseling and therapy. Coaching is very future-oriented, very task-oriented, helping people to move ahead and always being able to build in accountabilities that the goals that people are trying to reach, they are indeed reaching them. So you might have sessions that could be 35, 40 minutes. They could be up to about an hour for some people. They could go for 4 or 5 sessions. They could go longer. There's always, if people aren't moving ahead, though, Patty, if they get immobilized, then there might be reasons why they might need other assistance that isn't within the purview of the coach. And I've had clients that are seeing therapists and counselors to deal with some of the more deep-rooted issues while they are also seeing a coach, me, in tandem to work at these very specific goals. And sometimes if they're immobilized, that's where their therapy might come in if I'm not able to help them.
Okay, and I think it's really important that not only our listeners understanding the distinction, but also as coaches, we're really clear about that up front when we're establishing that agreement, that relationship about this distinction. And in your particular structure of coaching, because some people, I think, have, beliefs about what a coach does or does not do. And I know one of the things that in your coaching model that we don't do is give advice. So someone comes to us and says, I've got this problem. Can you tell me what to do about it? Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Sure. The International Coach Federation, one of their essential philosophy is that people are creative, resourceful, and whole. And the Cinergy model adheres to that. And what that does is develop the idea of self-determination, that it's up to people to figure out what works for them and how they would do something. And so if I told somebody what I would do, that could be so foreign to what they might do and would even contemplate. And even though I might have been in the field of conflict management for many years, as I have been, I don't pretend that I have other people's answers. And when you help people build self-awareness and they start to look at what it is that they can do, there is an empowerment of them and recognition of their own skill and ability. And most people, I would say, very rarely have I ever had someone who really gets stuck on what they realize that they can do for themselves, that it does not come out of my mouth. And even in the rare cases, I would encourage people in the field work, which is a common thing to give people a task between sessions, to consider more where they might not be able to go forward and to take it upon themselves to do that. And so that whole idea of helping people elicit from them what it is works in many different ways and very successfully, including that I think it's so important in our multicultural societies to coach people within the context in which they live and work. And so it is important to be very much in touch with what is within somebody's capability, knowing that they will tell you what their goal is. And it may not be what you think they ought to do, but they need to do what they need to do.
And yet, sometimes when people come in, their goal is to change the other person.
Right.
And so oftentimes it's very important when we're doing the coaching that this is about empowering you to respond differently, to think differently, because we can't change anyone unless we're working with them one-on-one. And so, oftentimes there's that whole discussion about what's in it for them as going through the conflict coaching. And in fact, that kind of leads to our next question is, why would someone choose to commit to conflict coaching? What is it for them, especially if they come in saying, I have a terrible boss or my mother-in-law don't get along and I just want her to change or I want him to stop doing X, Y, and Z. So when you say to them, it's not about changing them, then they're going to say, well, then how's this going to help me?
Right. So
and maybe we can use an example or a case a generic case that might have to put some context for the listeners.
That's great, Patty. There are a range of people who would seek conflict coaching. So in some organizational contexts, for instance, I've had more recently in the last 6 to 8 months, more people who self-select, who are managers, new managers, who've become in supervisory or higher level roles, and they are challenged managing how they deal with conflict and in helping their direct reports and others. And so they might self-select to get some help. In fact, some organizations increasingly have the foresight to say to new managers, if you would like to have a coach to deal with certain issues, what kind of coaching do you want or what do you need? And people identify, and then they would get my name or other conflict coaches' names, or if they need negotiating skills or strategic planning. And so there's been a huge thrust in recent years to organizations understanding, knowing the importance of executive coaching. And conflict coaching in my model falls within an executive coaching, organizational coaching umbrella, even though it can also be used in personal and family, community, and neighborhood, other kinds of disputes. So firstly, people self-select. So what's in it for them is they come with very explicit goals. Sometimes people are referred, and they may not always think that they ought to be there, and you get more of what you're talking about. There's blame, and the other person should be here, and I just want them to change. And what's in it for them is to give it a try to see whether within the coaching model as it's described to them that there's something that they can gain from working on it themselves. And although I've had many resistant people over time, there's always something at the back of people's minds that comes out within coaching about what they know that they could do differently. That doesn't mean I don't spend time with them on understanding the other person, what happened with them, what's going on with them, that the coachee or the client wants to change them. But there's resistance or wondering about it and why should I be here is often a part of people in conflict. Conflict doesn't always bring out the best in us, and so people come with a blame mode. And there are lots of techniques to help people start to get more insights on their contribution and the other person's contribution, and that changes and builds the awareness for people to move to their goal.
As you were talking, because I remember early on, like a good couple of years ago, you and I had a conversation coaching me around a relative that, for me, I responded to. My relative was very intrusive, very annoying to me, and I knew there was nothing about him that was going to change, and there was a lot of things that, it was always about him being right. It was always about, he wasn't a very good listener. There was just so many things that really triggered me, and I knew that wasn't going to change, and yet I would still get highly frustrated being around him. And even though he was a big part of my family at the time, I was in so much pain about it that I thought even though I wanted him to change, I knew that wasn't going to happen, I knew that I had to start looking at that situation differently. Otherwise, I could just feel that things were starting to get out of control for me when I was around him. And I remember that, my resistance around that was, okay, he's not going to change, so what do I need to change? And it might not have been around my behavior, but around my thinking and my assumptions about his behavior. And that was really a very empowering process for me, because it really did help me to shift my negative assumptions about him and his behavior. And it really helped me to see him in a more compassionate light. And so that's how that process was really, really powerful for me.
Well, it's great to hear that, Patty. And, I'm sure you've heard me use this great quote, which comes really from Wayne Dyer, which is, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I think that for me, is one of the premises of the model of conflict coaching that helps people look at things differently, as you described. And I laughed the other day because I was in a workshop training some folks, and somebody used that other great quote by Albert Einstein, which is, insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And those things inspired me to look at, when I was developing the model, because the people who I was researching with, I won't say using, were helping me. There was a certain need that people described about they had to do something different. And so my role, I thought, was, well, what would different be? And that's why the model developed as a way to help people look differently at their disputes. And when you mention the personal one, I just want to add that the model applies certainly to people who are dealing with family and other kinds of issues. And what I realized over time was that post-processes, like post-mediation, after someone's been in a conflict, they might want coaching around their lack of resilience. And that became an issue that I found that people were starting to bring. And then there were managers bringing issues around giving performance appraisals, and they were concerned about conflict erupting. And then I was asked to do pre-mediation coaching, people wanting to prepare to go to mediation. And ultimately, because this kind of goes full circle, because I started by telling you around how I found that many people had gone through conflict management training, and it wasn't as effective for their own personal things and issues, that I now, when I'm called on to do a generic conflict management training, not the conflict coaching, but just a generic, that I build in that people get coaching afterwards so that when they get to apply their skills, they've got a framework and they've got help and they've got some assistance to get them through.
Okay, very interesting. You know, it's while we've been talking here and whatnot, we have someone in the chat room who has been really identifying a lot about what we've been talking about. And I just wanted to take a minute to share a part of her story, if that's okay with you. So, you know, what was interesting is about, especially, you know, a lot of the conflict coaching you do is around work relationships, and certainly we have used conflict coaching in many contexts, as you said. Family seems to come up a lot in some of the cases that I've worked on and whatnot. And this particular listener was talking about her father-in-law, I believe it is. I might have gotten that wrong, but I think her father-in-law who just moved into town across the street. And you know, and that balance between keeping the peace and when to stand up for oneself and say what they need to say, and sometimes internalizing that. And I think that would be another example of if you're struggling with how do I know I'm going to be in this relationship, whether it's a work relationship, whether that's in a relationship with your in-laws, you know, really good sister brother, and you know that's an important relationship, and yet, you know, it's that balance that you're trying to seek for yourself. You want to keep the peace, but it's eating you up. You don't want to be the one that's the instigator. So this would be just another example of where conflict coaching can be a benefit to someone. And how do you look at that stuff for yourself? How do you create those boundaries for yourself so that you're still able to not feel walked on? And that's where that conflict competence part comes in. How can I become more confident and more confident as well in how I'm dealing with this situation, so one, that I have my own peace of mind, and yet that I'm also being able to be more competent in how I'm managing this and how I'm engaging, even though the other person's probably not going to change. And she did, the participant just said that, yes, it was her father-in-law. So thank you. I appreciate that, listener, for sharing that with us. I don't know if you have any additional comments about that, Cinnie, but...
Well, I think it's a perfect example, and one of the important things around that is the listener is really identifying, you know, the outcome that she wants, and a coaching process would help break that down more so that she's really clear on what it is that she wants and how she's going to get there. It goes back to what I referred to earlier around the gap. It also goes to, you know, that in conflict coaching, sometimes it's not around resolving an issue or necessarily having a difficult conversation or what am I going to do about this situation. It's how will I be in the world? And it's not just, and how will I be in that relationship? So it's not just about a period of time or a situations. It's applicable and hopefully durable. And that was the hope when I started this, that people would gain the competence and confidence. I think the use of those two words is very appropriate, Patty. how to do that in order that it's not just now, but it's carrying on, and what will I learn that I'll continue to apply? And that's what distinguishes it from some of the other concepts like mediation and third-party processes.
Okay, very, very good. Yes, I as conflict coaching becomes more and more people learn about conflict coaching as a tool, because this is actually still fairly new concept. Coaching in itself is not a new concept. Conflict coaching paired together is fairly new. People are still like, what is that? How does that work? I wanted to also explore with you that you had talked about conflict coaching in other contexts as far as, like, let's say someone is getting ready for a mediation, and you might do some conflict coaching prior to them going into the mediation.
Right.
And can you give an example of a context in which you might use that?
Well, the first time
pre-mediation coaching.
Sure. The first time I ever did that, Patty, was some years ago, where I had been doing a lot of family mediation before I shifted into workplace work, which was probably in the 96 or so. And although I had done a lot of family mediation, I was contacted by a person who was going to go into a family mediation. It was a woman who was very concerned about how she was going to relate to her ex-husband, and she wanted some assistance. She had met with the mediator, excellent mediator. I know who he is, and he had helped her about the process that she was going to go into, but she wasn't quite sure some things that she wanted to say to him, and she wanted somebody else to help her. And so I was not the mediator at the time. She hired me independently to help her convey to her ex what she wanted to say. And that has now expanded so that I sometimes help people, coach people that I'm not the mediator. I'll coach one of the parties. And there are times if I'm mediating that I will, as I've referred to earlier, use coach-like ways in order to help people participate more effectively in a mediation.
Okay. So again, there's a lot of different contexts in which one might use conflict coaching and the many benefits to them, whether that's preparing for a difficult conversation, which could be a mediation or not. It could be in dealing with family members, family issues. It could be just about their own. Like you said, it might not necessarily be that they're in a dispute, but they maybe, sometimes it's just about looking at something that happened a year ago and it still bothers you. I know there's definitely some things in my past where I'm like, why did it happen that way? Or what is it that I could have done differently? And I still ruminate about it. And sometimes people just want to do a session or two just to really try to understand that. Or maybe it's that, they want to understand it and they're like, I really wished I was still in contact with that person. But before I, have that conversation, in fact, I can't remember who I was talking to now, just in the last couple of days actually, and they were telling me that there had been a conflict actually with some friends, and because the conflict was so powerful, they actually didn't talk to each other for almost 10 years. And then finally they came upon each other again, and they started to have a relationship, but they never talked about what happened 10 years ago. They're pretending as if nothing ever happened, and so they're just now restarting this relationship again. And I kind of thought it interesting that they're kind of avoiding the elephant in the room. So that would be another example. So there's so many different examples in where this conflict coaching process can be very empowering for people. Now, we were going to talk a little bit about tips and strategies that they might consider practicing. Do you have anything that you would like to share with the listeners?
Well, I think the one thing that is important around conflict is that it is learned behavior. Over time, all of us learn from our families, our friends, and trial and error, and our teachers. And as we grow older, we do establish certain ways of doing that, doing conflict. And I realized that ultimately, we do not have a rule book. We all have our own ways of dealing with conflict, and they may or may not be similar to other people. And what I realized a good strategy is for clients of mine and also people who take the courses who want to do self-reflective work, we'll start to look at their habits. And so I think one of the best things people can do is to look at what is my habit when I'm in conflict. And it might be to focus people. So some people will be able to identify what their habits are. I tend to avoid, or I'm always accommodating. And to look at what is it about doing that? Why is it underneath what motivates people to do that? And so one part of the exercise would be look at what is your habit and where did it come from? And the next part is to take it a bit further and to say, what specifically leads to that? So what might trigger me? What might provoke me? What is it that people could say or do that's going to get a reaction from me? And once you've done that, just to look underneath it. And one of the definitions I use about conflict is it occurs when people perceive a value or a need or aspect of their identity is undermined. And so the suggestion is that you identify what the action is first and then look at what did I perceive was undermined, which value of mine, which need, which aspect of my identity. It could be all three, it could be just one of any of those elements of conflict. And once you've done that and looked at what is the impact when that happens, what is it that I react to, how is it that I react, and then to look at when people trigger me that way, what do I assume about their reasons for doing that? And that little sequence of triggers and then looking underneath it, and hot buttons by triggers, what is it that provokes?
Yes.
Look underneath it, and then how do I react? What's my emotion around that? And then what might I assume? We all have patterns, and we naturally follow them, and they're all different, when someone goes through that. And so I suggest that to build your own self-awareness, the listeners to the call, that you start to break down and deconstruct a little bit about what's really going on for you, and then to reverse it. What did you say or do that might have provoked somebody? What was underneath it for them? And
for them,
and then start to look at what was that impact, and what might they assume about my reasons for what I said or did. And those are just some little tools, Patty, that start to get people to understand a little bit more about what went on for them, but also what might have happened for the other person.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of summarize it here because there's a lot that I really, really want people to really, we talk about doing field work, so this is your field work, these strategies that she's talking about. So to kind of summarize what you just said, part of your field work is to do this. So what is my habit in conflict? So if my habit in conflict is to avoid, what is motivating me to show up in the way that I do in conflict? So what is that trigger then for me? What is happening in the situation by the person? What is the other person doing or saying that's triggering me, that's provoking me to shut down, if that's what my habit is? And then really looking below the surface, as you're saying, to look deeper, to understand what is the need that's being challenged? What is it that I'm not getting when I start to shut down? And how is that impacting me? Is it impacting my relationship with that individual? Am I distancing myself from that individual? Am I feeling bad about myself because I'm not standing up for myself? And then what are the assumptions, as you said, I'm making about that individual? And sometimes the initial assumptions might be he's a jerk. He's a racist. He's a this, he's a that. But you're talking about even going deeper with those assumptions about what are some other possibilities. And then you said to repeat it for the other side. In other words, kind of stepping in the shoes of the other person and kind of going through that same process with the other person. Did I summarize that correctly, or did I miss anything?
No, you did that beautifully. And it could be that one of your assumptions, and maybe your only assumption, is he's just a jerk. That's part of coaching would take that further and try to understand what is around that. But as a starting point, the sequence you described, Patty, is right on, and it really does help people, I think, to start to gain a little self-awareness. Okay, excellent. So, listeners, that's your fieldwork assignment. I
throw down the gauntlet and take the challenge and do that. You can either think through it, you can write it out, whatever is going to be the most effective to really, as your word, deconstruct the situation. Now, one of the other tools that you and I had talked about is one of your e-zines. Can you talk just a little bit about that e-zine that you have for folks?
Right. So for people who like to do self-reflective work, and, I think as emotional intelligence has increased and social intelligence as concepts, that people are doing a lot more self-reflective work as well. And I have a e-zine, it's a free newsletter. It's called Conflict Mastery. And the website's actually www.conflictmastery.com. And if you're interested, just put subscribe, Conflict Mastery, send it to Cinergy, Cinnie at Cinergy Coaching. I know you're going to repeat that. And just put subscribe, Conflict Mastery. And it comes out every month. And it usually has some kind of exercises or articles that help people look at some more self-reflective issues.
That's great. And both of the links that we talked about for both CinergyCoaching.com and ConflictMastery.com are on the show page. You could click on that right now. I'll take you right to both of those sites for you. So any closing comments that you'd like to share with the listening audience at this point?
Well, without knowing who's in the audience, certainly if you are interested in being trained, you can contact me. I have a 4-day program in conflict coaching, and it's taught all over the U.S. and Canada and Australia and Ireland, and so that's certainly something that people could contact me about. And you could follow me on Twitter. It's at Cinergy Coaching, again, CINERGY Coaching. And I have a Conflict Coaching Guild on LinkedIn. And there are questions that are posed, including Patty did a great question this week, posed a great one. And so lots of people from different backgrounds would pose a different question, and other practitioners would chime in and give their answers to those discussions. And there's usually at least a weekly discussion. So lots of different ways to keep connected in the conflict coaching field if people are interested in knowing more about it, either as a practitioner or as a client.
Okay, excellent. So we have 2 different websites. Click on the Blog Talk Radio show page that I have. It'll take you right to both of her sites, Twitter at Cinergy Coaching and LinkedIn for the Conflict Coaching Guild. So various ways. Are there any other ways that they can reach you?
Certainly.
Or is that the best way?
If anybody has any questions, certainly contact me at Cinnie, CINNIE, at CinergyCoaching.com. I'm happy to respond to you at any time if people want to send me an email and just ask a question. I'm available for that as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I just love doing this and being able to share with people all the different things that are available to them and just letting them know about the resources, the strategies, and the processes that are available to really help them. In fact, the caller that just shared with us that she's actually from southwestern Canada, from British Columbia, I believe it is. So I thank you again, the folks in the chat room and on the phone, for calling in and listening live. We really, really appreciate your support. So as we begin to close, let me give you some information I think you'd be very interested in. First of all, did you know that Conflict Resolution Day is celebrated around the world on October 15th? This is a national celebration of conflict resolution, and it's actually inspired by the Association for Conflict Resolution. That's here nationally in the United States and internationally. And it was inspired by the board's resolution proclaiming every third Thursday in October for an annual celebration of Conflict Resolution Day. And they have various national and international organizations that hold events on or around October 15th. And Conflict Resolution Day was conceived in 2005. And the idea is to promote awareness of mediation, arbitration, conciliation, conflict coaching, and other peaceful ways of resolving conflict. It's promoting the use of conflict resolution in schools, families, businesses, communities, governments, recognizing the significant contributions of peaceful conflict resolvers like Cinnie and myself, and attaining national synergy by having celebrations happen across the country and around the world on the same day. So if you're interested about learning about Conflict Resolution Day, Or maybe you want to organize something in your own community. It could be something as simple as, writing a poem or, actually having an organized event. It could be anything in celebration of Conflict Resolution October 15th. You could go to www.acrnet.org to learn more about Conflict Resolution Day.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.